In today's story, Mark Davis, a skilled lawyer, faces off against Karen Miller, the HOA president, who tries to use her power to stop Mark's vegetable garden. But she's in for a surprise. Mark isn't just any resident. He's a lawyer with the legal knowledge to fight back. As tensions rise, Mark uses his expertise to challenge the HOA's unreasonable actions, and the entire community stands by his side. This isn't just about a garden. It's a fight for justice and the rights of individuals. What do you think about HOA rules and their power? What would you do in Mark's situation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Be sure to watch until the end to see how this thrilling story unfolds. You won't want to miss it. I am Mark Davis, a lawyer who has dedicated 25 years to working in the office, facing long hours of stressful work, lawsuits, and never-ending calls. My life was full of pressure and tension. One day, I realized I couldn't continue living this way, and I needed to find a way to relax and regain peace in my life. So, I decided to make a change. I started planting vegetables in my backyard. On weekends, I immersed myself in gardening, planting rows of tomatoes, cucumbers, and other organic vegetables that I took care of with my own hands. It was the place where I found tranquility, the only space without the sound of ringing phones, papers, or lawsuits to handle. For me, tending to the garden was the only way to escape the pressures of work and to find peace of mind. However, I never expected that this peaceful life would soon be interrupted by someone I never wanted to meet, Karen Miller, the president of the HOA in our neighborhood. Karen could turn a normal day into chaos within minutes with her utterly unreasonable arguments. One morning, I still remember it was a Saturday. I was standing in the garden, my hands covered in soil after planting a row of tomatoes. The feeling of soft soil under my hands always gave me a wonderful sense of relaxation, but that peace was quickly interrupted when Karen Miller appeared. She had a perfect appearance, from her carefully styled hair to her outfit, which was always meticulously chosen, with not a single thread out of place. Karen walked over with a displeased look, arms crossed, her posture like someone ready to uncover a serious crime. "Mark, I need to talk to you," she began, her tone stern as if she were about to read an indictment. "Growing vegetables in your front yard like this is completely unacceptable." I looked at her, surprised and a little confused. "How is this unacceptable, Karen?" "I'm just growing a few vegetables," I replied, not knowing whether to laugh or be angry. Karen, impatient, gestured toward my garden. "This is not a garden that beautifies the neighborhood. This is a mess." According to HOA regulations, all front yards in Willow Creek estates must be landscaped according to a specific standard. And vegetables? They should only be in the backyard, out of sight from the front. I stood there, completely unable to comprehend. What about flowers? They're plants too, and no one complains about them. But vegetables are banned? Don't you see how illogical this is? Karen didn't bother explaining, just shook her head and pulled out her phone. "I'll take pictures of this and report it to the HOA. You'll receive a violation notice tomorrow morning." She was ready to ruin my joy just because of a small vegetable garden with no reasonable justification behind any of these rules. I couldn't help but wonder, is there anyone besides Karen who really believes that a vegetable garden could be such a big issue? I just smiled lightly, feeling like I was participating in a pointless conversation. "Karen, I think you need to review the HOA regulations again. I've lived here long before the HOA existed. And about the rules, I have exemptions in the property sale agreement." Karen heard that but was unfazed. She just shook her head and looked at me like I was talking nonsense. "That doesn't matter," Karen coldly replied, not paying attention to anything I said. "I'll take you to the HOA board, and I'm sure there will be a clear ruling on this issue." I stood there, feeling like I was being pushed into a game I never agreed to play. I knew my rights, but Karen didn't want to listen. She was too used to imposing unreasonable rules and making the neighborhood residents fearful, forcing them to comply with unfounded demands. "Karen," I said, trying to stay calm, "I understand you want to do everything by the book, but do you even realize if the rule you're applying is reasonable? My vegetable garden doesn't harm anyone. No one is affected by it. I grow vegetables for my family to eat, not to disrupt the neighborhood." Karen looked at me as though I were saying something absurd. "No one is saying you can't grow vegetables, Mark," she said, but suddenly pointed at my garden. "I'm just saying it can't be here, right in the front yard. If you want to grow vegetables, move them to the back, out of sight from everyone." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So if I grow flowers or ornamental plants here, will they be acceptable?" I asked, feeling like I was stepping into an absurd, unscripted comedy. Karen didn't answer right away, just shook her head. She hurriedly pulled out her phone and scrolled the screen as if she had everything prepared. "I will report this to the HOA immediately. You will receive a violation notice tomorrow morning. And don't think you can escape this ruling." Watching her furiously take notes, I could only sigh. To me, this seemed like a joke. I had lived here long before the HOA came into existence. Back then, the neighborhood was a friendly community where everyone respected each other. But since Karen took charge, everything changed. She didn't just run the HOA, she wanted to control every tiny aspect of people's lives. "Karen," I said, calmly, "I'm not going down easily. You can take me to the HOA, but don't forget that I have rights clearly stated in the property sale agreement. If you want to go to court, I'm ready." Karen shook her head, took a deep breath, and looked at me as though I had just done something foolish. "Get ready, Mark. You can't win against us." The next day, when I returned from the office, I saw a violation notice pasted on my door. It was a bright orange sheet of paper, the kind you usually see when something serious happens. I opened the paper and couldn't believe my eyes. $53 per day for illegal agricultural activities in my front yard. This amount wasn't small, especially since all I wanted was to grow a few vegetables for my family. I stood there, staring at the fine, then shook my head and chuckled to myself. Why is HOA fining me for growing vegetables? $53 a day, how many vegetables do I need to sell just to pay for this fine? I wondered, feeling a bit frustrated, but also unable to help but find it somewhat humorous. So many people in the neighborhood grow flowers and ornamental plants without anyone complaining, but I plant a small vegetable garden and I get fined? It just didn't make sense. So I began noting everything down in a small notebook. April 13th, 2025, violation notice with a fine of $53 per day. I could feel the absurdity growing inside me. But what I didn't expect was that this was just the beginning. On the morning of April 15th, I woke up early, hoping for a peaceful day as usual. But when I opened the door and stepped outside, I couldn't believe my eyes. 3 giant bulldozers were blocking the driveway to my house. I stood frozen, my eyes wide, unable to understand what was happening. The bulldozers stood there like metal monsters, blocking the way and preventing me from driving out. And, of course, standing beside the bulldozers was Karen Miller, with a triumphant look on her face and the confidence as if she had won a great battle. Beside her was David Smith, the HOA lawyer, standing there like an emotionless machine, not showing any sign of discomfort at the situation. "Mark," Karen started, her voice filled with self-satisfaction, "we will immediately remove these violating structures." She pointed at my vegetable garden, looking at me as if I were committing a serious crime. I stood there, trying to remain calm, though inside I was seething. "I'm just growing a few tomatoes, not building an amusement park," I replied, trying to keep my tone gentle, but I was far from peaceful inside. The 3 bulldozers blocked my driveway, and I didn't know what to do. What I was certain of at that moment was that things had gone too far. The frustration surged inside me, but I knew I had to stay firm. This wasn't a small matter anymore. $53 a day was already a burden, but now they were using 3 bulldozers to destroy my hard work and my joy. I couldn't let them continue like this. The frustration became unbearable as I looked at the 3 massive bulldozers blocking my driveway. The entrance to my house was completely blocked, and I stood there, unable to believe my eyes. I am a lawyer, I understand rights and legal matters, and I knew Karen Miller and David Smith's actions were a serious violation. But I wouldn't let anger control me. "Karen, David," I said, trying to keep my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk about rights and the law. You think bringing 3 bulldozers here will just get rid of my vegetable garden? Do you really understand the law here?" Karen looked at me, unwavering, as though she had anticipated this reaction from me. "Mark, do you still not understand? This is HOA policy, and I'm carrying out my duties." I raised an eyebrow and stared directly at her. "Karen, you're talking about HOA policy, but do you know that I've lived here long before HOA existed? My property rights go back before HOA, and I'm exempt according to the terms of the land sale agreement. You can't apply HOA rules to me." Karen, although slightly unsettled, still held her ground. "But we have a decision from the HOA board. These violations need to be addressed." I took a deep breath, then pulled out a small notebook, flipped to a page, and pointed to the clauses in my contract. According to Clause 6, Section 3 of the land sale agreement my family signed in 1973, my property is completely exempt from any HOA regulations, including planning rules. This was part of the agreement with the developers before HOA even existed. If you want to dispute this, I'm ready to take it to court. Karen looked at the document I handed her, but immediately turned away, still confident in her stance. Anyway, I've already received instructions from the HOA board. You can take these documents to court if you want. Karen, do you really understand the law? I asked, my tone calm but tinged with sarcasm. I'm a lawyer, and I know that HOA has no right to enforce these rules on me, especially with a clear exemption in the contract. You can't intimidate me with these unreasonable decisions. And if necessary, I'll take all of this to court to ensure my rights are protected. After the intense confrontation with Karen Miller and David Smith, I decided I couldn't just stand by and wait for the situation to pass. As a lawyer, I knew that in a legal situation like this, I needed clear and specific evidence. Not only would this help protect my personal rights, but it would also help the other residents in the neighborhood realize the abuse of power by the HOA. The next day, I began digging through old records that my family had kept for years. These documents related to the land sale that my family made in 1973 to the Willow Creek Estates Development Company. After an hour of tense searching through old filing cabinets, I found the original land sale agreement. I carefully flipped through each page, and my eyes stopped at Clause 6, Section 3 of the contract, which clearly stated, exemption from HOA regulations for family households, including the right to freely use and develop the land without being bound by any future HOA rules. At that moment, when I looked at the clearly written words in the agreement, I knew I had the most important weapon in my hands. My family was not bound by HOA regulations, and if necessary, I would take all these documents to court. Not only that, I also found a copy of the land ownership certificate issued by the County Land Management Agency in 1973, confirming my family's ownership of the land before the HOA even existed. This certificate clearly stated that the entire property I live on had retained ownership rights and exemptions from any external organizations, including regulations and impositions from the HOA. With these crucial documents in hand, I decided to immediately contact Sheriff Turner and Helen Green to inform them about the new discoveries. Helen, a longtime family friend, had helped me with legal matters before. After reviewing the documents I provided, Helen immediately agreed with my plan. She said, "Mark, I think it's time we bring this to light. We need to show Karen and the HOA that they don't have the right to act this way." The next day, I took all the documents to the county finance department to verify the information about the money the HOA had collected from residents in the area. This agency provided me with a detailed statement of HOA's income over the past year, showing that more than $150,000 had been collected annually from residents. But there had been no improvement projects or renovations done in the neighborhood. This clearly showed that the HOA had been collecting money without providing any benefit to the community. Furthermore, this money had been transferred into the account of a private company called Willow Creek Holdings LLC, which I found out was co-owned by both Karen Miller and David Smith. The evidence of clear corruption helped me face the threats of Karen and David. I not only had my legal rights but also solid evidence of their abuse of power. After I had gathered all the legal documents and undeniable evidence, I decided to call David Smith, the HOA lawyer, to request a meeting and discuss the matter. When the call ended, the atmosphere became tenser than ever. I knew I couldn't always rely on emotions to handle the situation, so I tried to stay calm and be clear about everything. "David, I've sent you documents regarding my rights. These documents not only prove my ownership but also provide clear evidence that the HOA has collected money from residents without completing any projects. This can no longer be overlooked. You should prepare yourself to explain the funds that the HOA has taken from residents in this area." There was a moment of silence on the other end. I could feel the tension and anxiety in David's voice. "Mark, we won't be able to discuss these documents right now. However, I promise I will review everything." I could sense the weakness in David's voice, which was a stark contrast to the confident tone he had before. He knew he was facing a much bigger issue than he had imagined. The next day, I received another call, this time from Karen Miller. I wasn't surprised to see her name on the phone screen, but her tone truly caught my attention. It was no longer triumphant, but instead filled with worry and uncertainty. "Mark, I think we need to sit down and discuss this. But we can't continue like this. I'll have to work with the HOA board again," she said, her voice faltering and lacking confidence. I could almost imagine the look on Karen's face, no longer the tough, self-assured attitude. She had realized that when confronted with irrefutable evidence, all her threats were meaningless. Both the HOA and Karen had lost control of the situation. "So now you're starting to understand, Karen," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "Remember, I'm not just defending my vegetable garden. This isn't just a personal battle. It's about the rights of all the residents in this neighborhood. If you don't want to face serious consequences, I suggest you reconsider your decision before it's too late." The change in Karen's tone clearly showed that she was starting to feel anxious. The HOA's decisions were reaching an impasse, and this time, she couldn't use her power to impose anything on me like before. The helplessness was evident in her words as she tried to find a way to back out. "Mark, I understand now," Karen stammered. "We will meet soon and discuss how to resolve this. We'll work with the HOA board." After the call from Karen Miller, I no longer felt threatened by the HOA. In fact, I realized that I was standing on solid ground. I had my legal rights and the support of the community. This was not just about a vegetable garden, but about fairness for all the residents in this neighborhood. I couldn't let the HOA continue to abuse their power without facing real opposition. So, I decided to organize an emergency meeting with all the residents of the neighborhood to publicly share the documents I had found and clearly explain the issues that the HOA was trying to impose on us. Helen Green, a longtime family friend, immediately agreed to help me organize the meeting. We decided to hold it at the community hall, where all the residents could attend. On that day, I prepared the legal documents, including the land sale contract, ownership certificate, and the HOA's income statement. I knew I had to convince everyone that it wasn't just me. We all had the right to be protected from these unreasonable regulations and the abuse of power by the HOA. When the meeting began, about 30 residents showed up. The atmosphere in the room was tense, but there was also a sense of eagerness. I could feel the change in people's attitudes. They no longer wanted to remain silent and accept these unreasonable conditions. "Thank you all for coming. Today, I want to share with you some important documents." I began, my voice confident. "These documents will prove that the HOA has no right to impose regulations on my family. And in fact, they've collected hundreds of thousands of dollars without completing any projects for the neighborhood. This not only violates my rights, but is an abuse of power against all of us." I continued presenting the documents, pointing out the figures and evidence I had gathered. Some people started shaking their heads, as if they couldn't believe what was happening. Mr. Jenkins, a longtime resident, was the first to speak up. "Mark, I've suspected the HOA for a long time. They keep taking our money for projects we never see, and now you've made it all clear. I support you." Mrs. Patel, an elderly woman in the corner of the room, couldn't contain her frustration either. "I've been fined for things that had nothing to do with me, just because I forgot to repaint my mailbox to match the approved color. Now I see I'm not alone. Thank you, Mark, for standing up for all of us." These words made me feel a strong sense of empathy. I realized that this fight was not just mine. The HOA wasn't only violating my rights, but also those of many other residents in the neighborhood. Another resident, Mr. Johnson, stood up and said, "No one wants to live under the rule of an organization like this HOA. We need to create a community where people can freely do what they want within the law." His statement completely changed the mood in the room. The residents began discussing passionately about creating a new residents group to replace the HOA and implement fairer and more transparent rules. They were no longer afraid. They realized they could stand up against this oppression. A woman in the group spoke up. "We can't keep letting the HOA control everything. I support creating a new residents group where we can all decide what's best for the community, not let a few people at the board decide for us." The community started to unite, and the idea of forming a new residents group to replace the HOA was increasingly supported. Lively discussions took place, and everyone felt a common goal: to create a fairer living environment for all. In the end, everything came to a close. Not just I, but all the residents of Willow Creek Estates stood together to fight against Karen Miller and David Smith. This long struggle wasn't just about a small vegetable garden, but about the rights of everyone in this neighborhood. And with clear evidence and the unity of the community, we made Karen and her allies face consequences they couldn't deny. After I provided all the documents and evidence to the county police department and the district attorney's office, everything started to move quickly. The corruption and embezzlement of funds by Karen and David were undeniable. Investigations revealed that over $300,000 had been completely misappropriated by Karen and David, through the collection of unjust fees from neighborhood residents without any actual projects or renovations being carried out. Furthermore, we discovered that Willow Creek Holdings LLC, the company where both Karen and David were major shareholders, had received a large portion of the funds collected from these fees, which were completely unrelated to HOA activities. This was not only an ethical violation, but also a serious criminal act. The police arrested Karen Miller and David Smith on June 1st, shortly after the evidence was publicly released. Just hours after their arrest, news of the case spread rapidly throughout the neighborhood. The residents of Willow Creek Estates began gathering at the community hall to celebrate the victory. They had not only won a legal battle, but also secured a victory for justice and transparency within the community. Immediately after the HOA was dissolved, we began to rebuild a true community of our own. The unreasonable regulations of the HOA were eliminated, and a new group of residents was formed to replace the old management system. Everyone in the neighborhood was involved in this process. We decided to establish a new community management system where everyone had a voice, and no one had to fear exercising their legal rights. In the end, Karen not only lost her position of power, but also faced investigation for her corrupt actions. After her arrest, the entire community felt like a weight had been lifted. David Smith also didn't escape punishment, as he was forced to face charges of embezzlement and fraud. Everything ended with the burial of the HOA, an organization that once claimed the right to control everything but lacked transparency and fairness. With the dissolution of the HOA, one of the first things the residents decided to do was take care of the community garden. Previously, Karen had deemed the garden unsightly and ordered the removal of all plants, flowers, and areas she deemed unsuitable for HOA standards. She even fined nearby residents for planting non-compliant plants. But now, the garden was no longer suppressed by unreasonable regulations. Helen Green, Mr. Jenkins, and I, along with other neighbors, rolled up our sleeves to tend to the garden. We replanted flowers, vegetables, and ornamental plants that Karen had previously removed. This wasn't just about taking care of the land, but an act symbolizing the restoration and unity within the community. We also decided to organize community events to keep the garden a place where everyone could meet, relax, and share stories. Every weekend, the whole neighborhood would gather in the garden to tend to the plants, host barbecue parties, or simply enjoy an afternoon relaxing under the shade of the trees. We even planned to build a clean vegetable garden in the area, where every resident could grow vegetables and share them with each other. Once again, the garden became a symbol of inclusion, collaboration, and community bonding. Everyone was free to do what they liked within the legal framework, and no one had to fear unreasonable decisions like before. Karen Miller and David Smith not only lost their power, but also faced serious charges. Karen was convicted of corruption and embezzlement for stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from the residents, while David was charged with fraud and working with Karen to falsify the HOA's financial reports. Both of them faced prison sentences and were required to repay the money they had stolen. As the story reaches its climax, Mark's unwavering determination and legal expertise lead to a shocking victory. Karen Miller and David Smith are finally held accountable for their corrupt actions, and the HOA is dismantled. The community comes together to rebuild not only a garden, but also the foundation of a fair and transparent neighborhood system. What began as a small dispute has turned into a powerful reminder that standing up for justice can change an entire community. But the story doesn't end here. It's a testament to what happens when we take control of our rights and refuse to accept injustice. What do you think? Do you believe more communities should stand up like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more inspiring content like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for more stories that challenge the status quo and bring real change.